And we're back.
We are.
Yep. New week, new war.
Yeah. That's how it goes. It's all good.
New war, but old ground.
Yes.
This feels like the early 2020s all over again.
Mm-hmm. Except some people were sleeping then or weren't alive
I
then.
know.
So.
Jesus Christ. It's watching all the newbies opine on this is like, nails on chalkboard.
Yeah.
They have
hard.
no clue.
Hard to put up with it.
Still, this is unprecedented in some respects. I mean, we never saw the scale of this before on the Palestinian side. As we'll explain, though, it's still a turkey shoot. I mean, the complete mismatch between the two. In that sense, like it's almost, on the face of it, it's suicidal. Now, that should tell you, if you any kind of contextual information about why Gaza is the way it is, that it's a desperate move. It's not like
Yeah.
it's all shaped by desperation because of the situation there. Instead, you're expected to condemn unequivocally this barbarism, and ideally, join calls for leveling Gaza, a war crime, killing about 2 million people. Or, as some people have said, which definitely takes me back to the days after 9/11, turning the Gaza into a glass parking lot, which is obviously a reference to dropping a nuke on it. But, yeah. The main thing for us, what some people are thinking, trying to keep something like a level head, and the main skepticism is that this may not have been a surprise, and that's the title of our show, Surprise or LIHOP. LIHOP is let it happen on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not the case that it's clear cut there, but there may be an element of it, in part because of the sheer capability mismatch between the two sides. Maybe, well, let's just describe what happened first. So it's a dawn raid. Right at the outset, when they're cutting the fence, the Israeli security perimeter is watched by drones, sensors. There have been former IDF people making vlogs about their experience of having done a tour down there, and they're surprised because they recall 10 and 15 and even 20 years ago, that if a cockroach so much as moved or a stork landed on the fence, everyone in the base and all the way up and down the observation posts is alerted. Guns are trained on it and threat is ruled out or shot at. That kind of thing. And yet, yesterday, hundreds moved through a fence they damaged, walked about a kilometer through open field in daylight, untouched.
Well, motorcycles and cars and stuff.
Many were on foot, though. Yeah, behind them. But initially, there's the infantry. The infantry is pickups, golf carts, and of course, the Air Force was paragliders. So I don't know which to say first. To note that this is novel and new, and a new level of offensive capability for Hamas, which I think objectively it is. But then, that's not the end of your framing of that, because then you have to recall that this is in the context of Israel with an Air Force, satellites, ISR, sensors and drones, as I said. And they didn't see it.
Yeah.
They took over at least, I think it's two. There's footage of one base being overrun by Hamas. The edited version is on Twitter and other Western social media, but on Telegram I've seen the unedited version posted, I presume, by Hamas themselves. And I counted about 20 IDF corpses in one of the bases.
Yeah,
that they took at dawn.
Who were all asleep, basically.
Okay. They were asleep. They certainly weren't responding until it was far too late. Until they had breached. Because remember, what I just described was an outer perimeter fence, basically the fence around Gaza. There's an open space. There's another fence. Then there's a wall. They blew up a wall. They mined it, IED or whatever, and then breached into that. And we think they've claimed they've taken IDF alive and captive back on Gulf buggies back into Gaza. And there's definitely footage of IDF soldiers killed inside their nearest compound to Gaza.
Yeah, which is in kind of no man's land.
Yeah.
Or desert area.
So that's a first. This is definitely like...
Yeah, the fact they got
a long
through...
time since any kind of...
The fact they got through the fence and the kind of border, the wall, and then and the fence is bizarre, and then through that area of I think a few hundred meters basically, which is kind of like no man's land in a certain sense, where anything that moves that shouldn't be there is shot and has been shot. Palestinians trying to breaking through on their own, whatever. There's been many occasions in the past X number of years where they've just been killed for leaving Gaza by illegal means, basically,
and dozens of cases, even when they're on their side of the fence, trying to farm, they're just shot in the head
as well. Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, probably a good summary of. And this has been known for a long time, but this is for anybody who needs a refresher or is new to it or whatever. It's just a couple of minutes that kind of sums up pretty much the way people in Gaza live and have been living for at least since 2005.
Gaza Strip is only 25 miles long and about 5 miles wide. 2 million Palestinians live packed into this tiny space, one of the most densely populated places in the world. Half are children. Many live in refugee camps speckled throughout the besieged territory. A stunning 80% of the population relies on foreign aid. Aptly called an open-air prison, there are only 2 ways to leave the enclosed area: the Erez crossing into Israeli territory and the Rafah crossing, which goes to Egypt. Both are completely controlled by hostile militaries. What Israel calls a border is actually a heavily militarized perimeter fence comprised of barbed wire, surveillance networks, and lethal no-go zones. If you roam too close to the so-called no-go zone, which extends 300 meters out from the fence, Israeli forces have authorized themselves to shoot to kill. Thousands of unarmed Palestinians have been shot for violating this rule in 2018 alone. The same goes for Gaza's coastline. It is the only place in the world where you can't even flee by boat, as refugees elsewhere often do. Fishermen are restricted to only a few nautical miles from their shore. Straying past that, even by accident, you can be blown out of the water by Israeli warships. A massive seawall on the north and south, currently being extended, boxes them into their small sliver of sea. This violence is compounded by an economic blockade that imposes a chokehold of poverty on Gaza, resulting in one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, according to the World Bank. 70% of the youth are unemployed, with 52% for the general population.
There you go. There's more to that, but that was just like a summation of the general situation.
That's a summation of the physical parameters of it. We touched on the high-tech ones as well. I mean, it's every bit or probably more impressive than what the Russians have deployed for drone oversight of the entire length of its battlefield against Ukraine. It's such a small area. It's even more. There are more layers to it. That's probably the thing that most for me that sets off. Like, hang on, how do they not see it coming? Now, maybe it's mundane. They did, but there wasn't anything they could do, because this is the first time these kind of numbers have attempted to come through. Well, how much are you hearing? I've heard they say hundreds of people on either mopeds, pickups, golf buggies, and of course I mean, that brigade and the paragliders. They're basically glorified dune buggies, you know, with a fan on the back. Like you just saw the containment they live in. At what point were these guys with mounted machine guns able to train without being noticed? That wasn't their first rodeo yesterday.
Yeah. No, I mean they can do. I'm sure there's paragliding in that respect allowed in Gaza. You know what I mean? They can do what they want inside their prison, if you know what I mean, as long as they don't leave it.
But then yesterday was the first time they actually tried two to a dune buggy with mounted guns, and successfully reached 22 sites across southern Israel. Well, this is one part that does actually kind of strike me as being a strategic advantage, because all that high tech is on the lookout for generally heat seeking. It might be infrared for a body, or radar, or other heat-seeking tech for missiles, incoming rocketry and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or even simply any vehicle moving along. Is that one suspicious? We can see it there, we can see it there. But this, if they get the gliders up, maybe it's at a certain altitude where they could evade detection, or there's no way to bring them down without actually tracking them and shooting them from the ground. In any event, they seem to land... the bulk of them just landed at... This is another kind of contextual thing that gives you an idea of the situation here. There was a big rave taking place. Outdoor...
Ravers, yep.
Ravers. Not far from Gaza. Like, obviously, I'm sympathetic to what happened to them, and I can definitely... It's a terror attack that came out of nowhere for them. I understand that's it in a sense. If you just take it as what happened, that is what happened. It's a terror attack. There's innocent civilians, and they get mowed down by people arriving with machine guns. Definitely, if you take it like that. But think about the situation where they're going to a rave right next to that place.
Yeah.
And they've no compunction that it might be inappropriate or dangerous.
Because Israel, has normalized it for everybody. Israel wants, has for a long time had a lot of tourists, a lot of visitors and that kind of stuff to Israel, because it's the only democracy in the Middle East, and they made the desert bloom and all that kind of stuff, and everybody should come and have fun in Israel, because Israelis are fun and they like having parties, and they're just like any other European or Western capital, so everybody come to Israel and have fun and stuff because Israel's fun. When, nobody in their right mind should go to Israel.
Right.
But a lot of people aren't in their right mind, so probably because they've been, propagandized against for a very long time. And, the Israeli government, has a lot of influence. Really lobby in the US has a lot of influence over US government and over the media. I mean, it's ridiculous, the level of fawning that has gone on about Israel and subservience that has been offered to Israel over the past, since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. So it's kind of ridiculous.
It's so
I couldn't live in a country like Israel. Knowing what's going on, I couldn't live in a country like Israel. In the same way, apartheid South Africa, I couldn't live in apartheid South Africa. I certainly couldn't. You couldn't live in the country in general. It would maybe take me a while, but eventually I would be like, no, I'm not living here. This place is a shithole, And I may have all the trappings of a modern civilized state, whatever, but it's fundamentally uncivilized because of the nature of the State of Israel and what it was founded on. It's founded on the massacre of Palestinians, and the theft of their land, and then the imprisonment of a couple of million of them in the largest open air prison, as you just heard. So who would want to live in a state that has those values, that underpin its entire existence? That those are the values on which it stands. Ultimately, regardless of what values they claim, the facts are that that's the foundational myth of Israel isn't a foundational myth. It's actually well documented. It's founded on slaughter, basically. A slaughter and massacre of an indigenous population who they then, for the following 75 years since the foundation up until today, have proceeded to treat as second-class citizens and summarily murder and kill on an ongoing basis, with the connivance or acceptance, to a large extent, of most of the Western media, most of the global media really, but particularly in the Western media, they turn a blind eye to that. They have done for quite a long time. So it's pretty black and white. It's not about Muslim Israel. It's not about Muslim Christian. It's not about West East. It's not about any of those kind of supposed differences or ideologies. It's very fundamental. I mean, nobody in the right mind. You can't appeal to. I don't get to abuse the basic human rights of other people on the basis of a religion, on the basis of, or any ideology I might invent, or any story I might invent that says my abuse of these people
is
justified or is okay. It's not abuse actually because blah 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 blah. No, it is, and it's very clear cut, and everybody knows it. Everybody with any sense knows it. I mean, I know they appeal to Israel and the Holocaust, and they need a place to live. The Jews are persecuted, blah blah. That's all old history. It's largely irrelevant. It is irrelevant to what they're doing today. It's just used as an excuse for Israel, the state of Israel, to continue to do what it does to the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
And that's what they're founded on. Like we were saying not so long ago, that's what the foundation of the state of Israel is on stealing the land, killing other people, stealing their land, living on it, imprisoning those people on that land, and then continuing to make enemies of them, obviously, by the way you're treating them, but also to make enemies of sympathetic countries in the region. Obviously, the other Middle Eastern Muslim nations have for a long time been, nominally at least, or officially certainly, a few of them definitely enemies of Israel, for the same reason, because they don't accept Israel's right to exist in the way that it is currently existing. And no rational person should accept Israel's right to exist as an abusive state, that abuses people that are supposedly under its care and treat them as second-class citizens and put them in open-air prisons. Who's got a right to do that? What rights are we appealing to here? That someone has a right to.
Well, the right that was claimed by Netanyahu on his TV address to the nation last night was revenge. That's curious because there's no other world leader, whenever this country has justifiably been attacked in some way, who actually makes the case for. I think the direct quote, it wasn't in English, it was in Hebrew, but someone translated it. I think his quote was, "We will wipe them out. Gazans should." This is the sick one. We will recognize this because most people don't. They go, "Well, yeah, the civilians should get out now." He said, "Gazans should flee now." ... He's threatening to what? Because he knows they can't leave. They're not allowed to leave.
Yeah.
So I think he expressly called for genocide and said that the motive that was justified by it was revenge. That just doesn't happen. In other situations, not even, I think, Ukraine made that their official statement on ginning up support elsewhere, overseas, for its war against Russia.
Yeah. Well, you can.
But Israel does it, and nobody blinks an eyelid.
You're not allowed to, or they're so mind programmed that they don't know what basic right and wrong is anymore. They talk about it all the time in the context of other situations, other countries, rights and wrongs, and how this country is a bad actor, or is abusing its people, or whatever. The media and Western governments will talk about other countries all the time, but when Israel does exactly the same thing, they don't call it that. So it's kind of sadistic, like Netanyahu saying that is pretty much it's sadism, basically. Like, I mean, somebody can imagine someone who has imprisoned a person or a family, let's say, in a cage in their basement for 40 years and beats them every day, savagely beats them every day,
and occasionally turns the power off to the house.
And then on most days they say, "Listen, I'm going to give you your savage beating today, but I'll give you 5 minutes to leave," and then walk away. but don't unlock the cage. And then go and beat them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not fucking rocket science. Like, it's not. There's nothing straight. There's nothing. There's no quibbling. There's no nuance in this. There is no nuance. People think there's nuance, but there's not nuance. People are programmed to think there's some kind of nuance when there's not nuance. And if you were in that situation, if you were living as the Palestinians have lived, any normal person have been living as the Palestinians have been treated and forced to live for multiple generations at this point, every opportunity you got to strike back at your tormentor, you would take it. And you would be, you would...
Well, this is what the scenes in Gaza are like, definitely jubilant. They're celebrating.
And they don't care. They don't
But it's
care.
not, and then the scenes of them celebrating, Israel goes, you see, they're all messed in the head.
And there's people on Twitter who don't understand, like newbies who come to it and have these hot takes, and they're just completely idiotic. You'd think they'd kind of read up on. They're like, even people who seem to be fairly clued in, like geopolitically on the war in Ukraine, etc., they all fold when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and they make this argument that any of you people, supporting Palestinians and their attack of Israel don't really care about the Palestinians because this is only going to lead to one response from Israel, which is disproportionate murder of Palestinians, destruction of Gaza and murder of Palestinians. So how can you support that? And it's like, it's not about me. You see, to those people I say, when you're kind of like in your armchair generally kind of place there where you sit on high and pronounce from your moral high ground, you've no fucking idea what you're talking about, really. It's not for me to say that the Palestinians, that I shouldn't support the Palestinians, what they're doing, because the Palestinians are going to suffer. The Palestinians have chosen, and you can ask them to a person in Palestine, they've chosen this, and they've done it repeatedly over and over again. And you know what? At this point, they don't give a shit about Israeli bombing of Gaza. It means nothing to them. It's happened so often. Israel blows up buildings in Gaza and kills Palestinians in Gaza so often that it's irrelevant to them. So I'm being asked by these armchair generals, moral armchair generals, to project onto the Palestinians how I would feel, how I should feel in their position. Like, Palestinians, you should care more about your own well-being and your own safety and your own livelihood and your families and the infrastructure of Gaza. You should care more about that. You should be like me, because I care about your infrastructure and your lives, and you should as well. And they completely fail to understand that the Palestinians have been so persecuted for so long and have received this kind of abuse from Israel for so long that it doesn't matter to them anymore. They're willing to sacrifice their lives when their lives are made so unbearable that losing their life isn't a big issue anymore. Mm-hmm. That's what these idiots don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why they accept Hamas as well, with the eschatological religious bent to it. Yeah. It's not that they don't know about the history of the PLO. Yasser Arafat, he was definitely a pan-Arabist, secular Arab leader. He did not want to go this route of just martyrdom for his, And but he was poisoned, but whatever.
Israelis killed him.
He was taken out, and
Israel sidelined him and the PLO as a moderate pan-Arabist, relatively, not secular, but more secular than Hamas, let's say. The Israelis actively funded, and this is on record, Israelis saying it, they actively funded Hamas as a counterbalance, quote-unquote counterbalance to the PLO. Now, you think that's a counterbalance. When you hear counterbalance, you think, they funded Hamas because Hamas was more moderate than the PLO. The PLO was more dangerous. Yes, the PLO is more dangerous, but the PLO was under Yasser Arafat, and even today, is more dangerous to Israel because they're moderate. Because they say no violence, let's find a diplomatic solution, let's push for whatever it is, a two-state solution, give us independence. They do the kind of Gandhi approach, and that's extremely dangerous for Israel, because Israel absolutely needs, for its existence as it is today to continue, it needs a violent threat perpetually at its doorstep in order for it to justify its entire existence, not doing what it does, but to justify its entire existence. Because Israel was, like I said, was founded and is based on violence, on expropriation of all people's land, on living on it, and therefore on them always being under threat, because they are under threat, and they should be under threat, because they stole other people's land and continue to persecute them. So they recognize there's a little bit of clarity there amongst the Israelis, where they realize that but by having this unspoken kind of policy, essentially, that we need to always have a threat on our borders. They're basically saying that there always will be a threat on our borders as long as we continue to act in the way that we're acting today, to be the state of Israel that we are today, because the foundation of the state of Israel is immoral and unjust. And they know it. It's like when you know you've done something wrong, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you realize that if you don't make amends in a certain sense, you don't say, listen, let's end this conflict. How do we end this conflict? Well, then there has to be some justice has to be applied to the whole situation. You can't have a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unless you apply, like, no justice, no peace. You know that lovely, was it Black Lives
Civil rights. Well, originally civil rights.
More recently, Black Lives Matter. Right, everybody recognises supposedly no justice, no peace, and it is a thing when there's a conflict. Conflict resolution is all about, in order to have justice, or in order to have peace, you have to address historical injustices.
Yeah.
That everybody recognises that. Like Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation recognises that. They've done it around the world in different places. So, and Israel understands that if it goes that route, it cannot continue to exist. Certainly within the borders that it has today, and therefore in terms of the influence, etc., it has. So it's decided that, okay, listen, we're not doing that. We're going to always have to have this threat on our border.
Look at the decades-long efforts, the Oslo Accords, the follow-ups to that ended the First and Second Intifada, then more recently the Abraham Accords. The amount of effort internationally, not just diplomatically, but as we saw there, Gaza is basically 80% sustained by direct aid from NGOs, to try to normalize the situation. Sooner or later, this will have to happen vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
It's already happened largely, right, in the north of Ireland. It has to be normalized. And enormous international pressures are put on it to make it happen. But somehow Israel keeps finding itself under what it presents to the world as unprovoked attack.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we just have to keep on as. And
oh, look, there's another unprovoked attack.
Yeah.
We just can't get a moment here. We can't get a minute's peace with these terrorists always attacking us. They spin that bullshit narrative, and it's so inane. You know what I mean? It's for retards, basically. It's for people who literally couldn't think their way out of a wet paper bag. They literally, it's the super simple, childish version. And if you haven't trained yourself through looking at the world, or even just looking at your local environment and human relations and stuff, to realize, if you haven't understood and you're an adult, if you haven't understood by the time you become an adult, that those black and white analyses, takes on certain things are nearly always wrong, because life is far more nuanced, but you believe it at the level of an even more complex level of the level of a country and conflict between the countries, and you think, yeah, those terrorists are always attacking us. Really? That's it? And there's nothing we can do about it, so okay. And what's the context and what's the whole story? No, don't worry about that. It's just the terrorists, they'd be attacking us, and we be trying to defend our right to exist. Know what I'm saying? Yeah, good. Okay, whatever. It's like, fuck me, dude. And that's why I get on Twitter, from supposedly intelligent people on Twitter. Even people that I would have thought have a bit of they fall into the kind of they see the pictures of Israeli civilians being killed and stuff, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's all gone. Context, analysis is all gone, because they appeal to emotion and the emotional trigger.
They see
done.
These are civilians. They were just trying to live a normal life when this atavistic, murderous, bigoted force just intervened and massacred them. That's it.
Yeah.
Closed camera. That's the frame. That's all. The entire frame now.
So all those ravers are having a rave a kilometre or less from the largest open-air prison in the world. Right?
Yeah.
They're having a rave, raving it up, taking
with a big
drugs,
statue
loving
of
it.
Buddha or something.
Buddha and peace
it
and
might
love.
even have been a peace thing for Gaza. That
Probably
maybe an
not.
extra twist in this. They may actually have been the more liberal types who would like to see a peaceful solution long term. I think I'm not sure about that. I think that's partly why they were so close. It was kind of like a love end for Gaza. I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. I doubt those people would be.
That would be the best spin you could put on.
That'd be the best spin, but I don't think that's the case. And I mean, in any case, it's like not very respectful to,
a place where children are malnourished and stunted, and
have a loving rave.
They said half of the people are kids. I think there've been plenty of studies that the kids there are like they're psychologically traumatized. Like no other group. So
that's not what I meant by that is not a normal life.
No.
These people are not living a normal life. You're not living a normal life when you go and take drugs and party a kilometre from the largest open air prison in the world. In the country that is imposing the largest open air prison in the world on 2 million people, half of them children, and you're having a rave a stone's throw away. That's not a normal life. You can't. If that's what passes for a normal life, then you have no conscience.
Yeah.
It's a conscienceless normal life.
Okay, whenever this happens, whenever Israel does something, I'm usually thinking first, what's going on domestically? Well, for 40 weeks continuously, there have been protests against the relatively recent new Netanyahu-led coalition government in Israel. It basically can't get off the ground because he's hemmed in by pro-democracy protest. And there's an interesting thing there because there's been evidence that the U.S. State Department funding is key for that. And, notorious globalists, let's say, like Yuval Harari, have been out there speaking in front of the crowd, rallying them up. We've seen the crazy banners they've had where Putin, Xi, and Netanyahu are all just with letters dictators, limited to one. So there's what I'm getting at here. That's one cleavage point. That's a problem in Israel right now. Okay, so that has gone away overnight, at least temporarily.
Yep.
But I won't. That's not the only. It's more complex than that because the way I framed it there would suggest that Netanyahu has an interest. He did this. He's behind letting this happen. No, because you're talking about the entire apparatus of Israeli state security forces here, from secret intelligence to official intelligence, Mossad to the army, okay? Netanyahu cannot wield enough influence to cause, let's say, a stand down and thus this calamity. In fact, in the reverse, I would suggest that he has a problem. Someone else or other forces around him have just given him a problem. So my instinct is not to actually gloat that this is Netanyahu doing his cycle thing.
Somebody else wants something else.
I think he has a freaking problem. This is a really big... Latest Times of Israel says 600 Israeli dead. That's more than Israelis have been killed in 20 years by the Palestinians.
Yeah. It's
other things that are going on. Backlash following COVID. That's still an issue in Israel. They have the same general anti-left issues that we're seeing elsewhere. There is a reaction to the transgenderism, to the globalist planet-saving, climate change. No, there is. Yeah, what I'm saying is that there's a lot of fractures in Israel domestically, just within the Jewish majority, that you can see would require something drastic to, quote, unite the country. And everyone knows war is always the great unifier, at least in the short term. So that's what's going on domestically in just the last year or so. Another thing I noticed is, you saw that too, it's the anniversary. This took place yesterday on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, 50 years ago, right? At first, I thought, well, wow, Hamas really chose their timing, But again, that would have suggested there's no one better for anniversaries and timing than the Israeli deep state. If you look at a whole history of wars and attacks and symbolic messages or little ops or assassinations they've carried out of enemies anywhere in the world, they love the numerology of dates and the symbols of anniversaries and stuff. So was that Hamas or was that someone else? that's obviously getting people to draw comparisons to Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur War in 1973 was a different time. That was over in 5 days. Israel was so powerful then it could end it with American support, but it was the Soviets supported the other side. The other side was the Egyptian and Syrian military.
Uh-huh.
At the time, Egypt and Syria were a kind of union state, a bit like Russia and Belarus.
Yeah,
same flag, same party ideology, and so on, as part of the pan-Arabist movement of the 60s. That force coming from the south in Egypt and the northeast, in Syria, were crushed within Israel within 5 days, to the point that they took the Golan Heights and have held on to them ever since. Syria has not been able to take them back. And so 50 years ago, their military superiority was so strong, they actually grew from a surprise attack, right? From 2 states. And you're meant to kind of in your mind go, wow, it's happened again, poor Israel. But it's not even, it's not 2 states. Egypt right now has its border sealed. It has for a couple of decades, in fact. There is no, or very little, that doesn't acknowledge ability for any military assistance to come into Gaza through its Egyptian border. There are no state backing. There's rumors about, Iran has signaled its support and so on. There's rumors that weapons have come in
from Iran,
via Iran, and maybe even through the
how that happens,
black market of Ukraine. Yeah, how does that happen? Because like we saw, they control the seas, the air, the tunnels. They boasted, as recently as last year, that they, quote, destroyed all tunnel access into and out of Gaza. They found them and they destroyed them.
They found not only that, but they put sensors in the ground so they can detect any digging or anything like that.
Right.
all the way along. Any digging at all, they can detect.
So
it's ridiculous. The whole thing's ridiculous.
That linking in people's minds with Yom Kippur is crazy. It's interesting that was done as a kind of signature of it, but the two things are Israel's dominance since 50 years ago is so much higher.
If it signals anything, it signals that the people who were behind this, who allowed this to happen, are planning a bigger war. Are planning to use this as, or trying to use this as to ignite a larger war in the region. Maybe have Israel attack. And Americans are maybe involved in it. Who knows? Have Israel attack Iran, and Syria, and then Iran. Progressively, like say Lebanon comes into it because,
this morning they go Hezbollah fired artillery.
Yeah, they go too far in Gaza, and then Lebanon comes in, and then Syria comes in, and then Israel's suddenly at war with Lebanon and Syria, and then Iran comes in and it spirals out of control. And it'd be great for Joe Biden, as a distraction for for next year's 2024. And in that sense, it's not even a distraction anymore. Wars used to be useful as a distraction, but now they seem to be designed to just kill as many people as possible. There might be some benefit politically to having wars like there used to be. And it may be beneficial just to distract the population or put the US in a crisis mode, where the US is now partly involved in a war in the Middle East, a major war in the Middle East. But there's a couple of things there. I mean, this is very different from the past ones. This doesn't benefit Netanyahu because it's actually really bad for Netanyahu. Previously, when these kind of attacks from Gaza or by Palestinians into Israel that benefited the government at the time, reminded the population that we're at war and you need a strong government and some kind of war. Not that we're at war, but that we're under this continual attack, and to build up the security state and stuff like that. It was like a quote-unquote suicide bombing, or it would have been rockets fired from Gaza. But like we're saying, the thing that stands out about this is the relatively shocking level of bloodshed for the Israelis and the shocking defeat essentially for the Israelis, and how it all could have happened with it being so controlled, the border being so controlled, nothing moves in that area, and yet there they go through the fence into a bunch of towns up to like 20 kilometers away. I mean, they'll give those up. So that goes from it being a benefit. That goes from the odd rocket attack or a suicide bombing inside Israel. is a benefit to the government, because it can use it as, remind the people how much they need the government and how they're threatened. But we're controlling it. This has gone way beyond that, and it looks really bad for Netanyahu.
Yeah.
It looks like a massive fuck up. You're useless. How could you have let this happen? So it's not. I don't think Netanyahu's involved, and especially like in the context of what you were saying, him being basically under attack
At home.
at home, but also from afar, from the US, essentially, that the elements within the US, the kind of deep state or Washington establishment, actively funding protests against Netanyahu over the past year. And this is then, is in that context, occurs in that context, and it's just another attack on Netanyahu, or an attempt to force his hand, So it suggests that there are people behind the scenes with another agenda. And I don't think it's limited to just making Netanyahu look bad. Maybe it could be just trying to get rid of him, because there's people, you could argue that Netanyahu's days are numbered now. You know what I mean? He's going to be booted out over this. You know what I mean? And that solves that problem that's been ongoing for a while for people within the Israeli establishment. But it could be used also as an escalation for further conflict.
Yeah. We should certainly be very careful to accuse Netanyahu of willingly sacrificing. Like I said, it's 600 dead, 2,000 injured, and acknowledged. They usually don't talk about this, but they have to, because it's all over social media. There's 100 civilian captives taken back into Gaza, including some IDF personnel. Maybe we should explain that to people. That is such a sensitive issue. This is, for Israelis, this is like as sensitive as American regular personnel coming home with body bags. They, in the mid-2000s, there was one soldier the Gazans managed to break out and capture, Gilad Shalit. It was a 5-year-long saga. I think they finally got him in a prisoner exchange in which the Israelis swapped one soldier for 8,000 Hamas / whatever degree of affiliation they had with the Palestinian organization. 1,000 people. Now they have 100 civilians plus, including arguably, this isn't confirmed. In fact, the IDF denied it, but there does seem to be evidence that they took a major general, Nimrod Aloni, who his role was depth strikes. They were basically abducting key targets inside Gaza these last few years. So they got the very guy who's in charge of overseeing the security situation. Anyway, the scale of that is such a problem domestically, because this is the feature of the Jewish state, is that whilst their leadership covertly has a long bloody track record of doing horrific things to their own people that usually are obviously, they're called conspiracy theory at the time, and yet there are Wikipedia pages now about things like the Laval affair in Egypt, in which it is now known that Israeli forces, at the behest of the actual government, deep state, expressly killed some of their own people for domestic purposes of rallying the Jewish population in unity, because that's such a strong mythos.
The Lavon
affair. The Lavon affair. That's it. That's what makes everyone. That's what the Jewish nation is. Its mythos is we look after our own like no one else. That's how they've stayed together without a state for 2,000 years, right? And now they have one. But this is my only, I suppose, doubt. I put this on the other side of the scales, let's say. What you just outlined is the power motives, and they could involve a greater war or something like that. It could involve just ousting Netanyahu. But on the other side of the scale, one Israeli harmed and it getting in the news in Israel is a bad... It's a catastrophe.
Bad juju, yeah.
In the national mythos. I know the psychos on top don't give a shit, but... So here, like now, now you can put yourself into the headspace of what's going on nationally in Israel right now. There's hundreds of people captive, 600 killed. For them, this is like catastrophe, in a way that thousands of body bags coming back to the United States are. The sheer, so if this is a LIHOP, the sheer is huge.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting the way people immediately seized on, the media immediately seized on it as being, and we're making reference to 9/11. You can see the Telegraph here, and there were others, CNN, a bunch of others. Just go down to the picture a bit more. There you go. Hamas terrorists butcher civilians as stunned Israel suffers 9/11 moment. Well, if it was a 9/11 moment, then it was. I mean, I don't want to take them literally because they're obviously just kind of manipulatively spitballing there to try and I don't know, get clicks or something. But if it was a 9/11 moment in reality behind the scenes, then that suggests that it was a LIHOP. It was let it happen on purpose for a specific agenda, and the agenda of 9/11 was to start a war, basically to launch the American war machine outside its borders and far field, and to consolidate or project American power into the region, which, in that case the Middle East. And if it's Israel's 9/11 moment, then obviously it's designed to provide justification to
similar geopolitical designs
to start a war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I'll take them at face value. Like if it's their 9/11 moment, then that's what's going to happen. I'm assuming the person who came up with that headline or came up with the 9/11 moment meme, maybe if that person knew what they were talking about, if they were an insider, then it would be that.
I've seen it loads.
Yeah, but it's funny how those things spread around.
Nikki Haley's statement to CNN or whatever was.
It's worse than 9/11.
This was the mirror reverse of what Netanyahu and forget his name, Prime Minister at the time, said on 9/11 on CNN in studios, like 20 minutes after the attacks. Haley did the reverse. She said, "This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America. This is the mirror image of what happened on America's 9/11."
Netanyahu was the Prime Minister at the time.
Was he? I was thinking of Ehud Barak. Maybe he was defense minister or something.
It's funny that like 23 years ago, Netanyahu was Prime Minister. He was a Prime Minister for America's 9/11, and he was Prime Minister for Israel's 9/11.
I wonder this time, is he going to get up and tell MSNBC that this is very good? Well, not very good, but it helps Israel's.
Yeah.
That's what he said on 9/11.
Well, it's America's opportunity to that. Biden could get up now and say,
be the peacemaker, or
no, he could get up and say, well, this is very good for. I mean, it's not very good for America, but it helps America. It may turn out to be that it does help America in one way or another, at least the Biden administration. If another war gets kicked off, I mean, if that happens in the Middle East, they're going to have to wrap up Ukraine pretty quickly.
Where did that go?
Well, it'll have to. Well, obviously it goes off the headlines, still continuing. But if they're going to start launch a war in the Middle East, with obviously if Israel is front and center, then America has to have their back, in theory. And in that case, then Ukraine would have to quickly go bye-bye, go be wrapped up.
Yeah.
So the spigot to Ukraine would quickly be turned off. Within a week, turn off the money flow and the weapons to Ukraine. A week later, Zelensky's having surrender talks with the Kremlin, but you don't even hear about that because they've already started another war. So
maybe, or they just keep the spigots flowing to both.
I don't think they have the.
Sure they do. They just crank up the printing presses, right?
Well, that's money. Another thing's weapons.
Okay. Meanwhile, out in the real world, because remember, all of the hysteria you're hearing is kind of within the bubble of the West, including Israel. It's its own bubble. In the real world, the official statement from Russia and China did not do the whole condemnation of this barbarism routine. They reiterated the official UN position, which remains the case, except, of course, for America's veto, calling for the two-state solution based on 1967 borders. Mm-hmm. That is, of course, not realistic in the status quo. De facto, de jure, it is the only. That's the one why they keep harking back to it. De jure, it's the only one that's a viable solution, a political settlement. that may or may not involve the population of Gaza having to be transferred to the West Bank, so that you don't end up with like a state and then another state. That's ridiculous. Look at Azerbaijan and Armenia, which we can talk about in a sec. But at the very least, that it's de facto not the case. But this is part of the context they don't understand. What's been happening since 9/11? Gaza was already set up the way it was at that time. That evil bastard Sharon, even he recognized that Gaza, as much as they turned it into the surveillance of it into a fortress, he recognized they had to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And he pulled back some settlements that were right up on Gaza City at the time, and he got called a traitor, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's, ironically, Gaza is not what has changed most in the Israel-Palestine situation in the post 9/11 era. What has changed most is the West Bank. It's the main remaining chunk of Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the map, and officially you're like, okay, well, that's, there's a sizable chunk there, and it comes right there through Jerusalem. There's a viable state there. Why haven't those Arabs, what's wrong with them? Why can't they just make do with what they have? Because they're piecemeal carving up the West Bank as well.
That they have done long before now. Yeah.
With settlements. And what they do is they reroute the walls continuously, the fences. For example, if there's a highway or just whatever, even a single lane road, modern road built from Israel proper to a new settlement somewhere in the West Bank,
Mm-hmm.
they just simply put the fence all the way along the road, around the settlement on the hill, and then back again.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done this so many times that the actual de facto map of the West Bank today is basically about 24 Gazas, micro statelets.
Mm-hmm.
This hill, that valley. That's the West Bank.
Here's a map of the changes since from historic Palestine to more or less today. Historic Palestine on the left, in green, before the Israelis moved in, or the Jews moved in rather. And then 1947, you have the partition plan, and then the creation of Gaza in 1967 in the West Bank, and then today you see Gaza's down there, and the West Bank is all splintered up into little pieces, and in between, like they basically, all those white areas in the 2020 version there, on the right, all those white areas in what was the West Bank, their settlements being built in through all of that. So it's obvious that Israel, the original plan was the Israeli state was to in some way or other completely subsume the Palestinian people and somehow turn them into like pseudo Jews or something. But obviously that hasn't happened. It was ridiculous to think that would ever happen, especially since the way they're treated as second-class citizens. And it was their land to begin with. They lived on it. They owned it. They farmed it.
Yeah, but even those basic facts, like you get educated people, analysts down to the finest nuance of other situations, who will seriously still argue that there was no one there. They'll repeat back to you the Israeli core argument, the foundational argument.
They have to say that.
A people without a land going to a land without people.
Yeah.
I mean, are you fucking... So, yeah, they believe it. And
I mean, there's literally no argument. There is no morally sound or humanistic argument for what Israel has done to the Palestinians and continues to do to them today. There's none. I mean, I don't even know. I can't even think of what they would say at this point, because I wouldn't accept any kind of like, oh, this was our land back in 2000 years ago or something, or God gave us. It's like, that's not a serious argument.
No.
Next. Yeah. Can we have someone who's going to actually try and give a solid argument? And that's why they keep going back to those memes and stuff and the mythology, because they literally, it's an admission that they know that they're in the wrong, but they carry on. So,
yeah,
and the thing about it is we're not happy about these attacks, or any civilians being killed or whatever, but I mean, you have to apportion blame and cause to the conflict. You know what I mean? And you have to, not only that, but point to the person who has the ability to resolve it, to stop this from happening. Israel has the ability
Definitely.
to stop this from happening. So the fact that it doesn't stop it from happening means it's to blame. Israel is to blame for the deaths of Israeli civilians over the past couple of days.
Do you know what the population of Israel is?
Like 6 million or something,
It's grown. It's 9.5.
including Palestinians.
Still, it's just less than Belgium.
Hmm.
Look at the way they've just dominated,
That's including Palestinians, 9 million.
including 21% of the population is Israeli Arabic. Is that including the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank? I don't think so. I think that's just...
It's in the West Bank, I think. I think they include the West Bank. It depends. You get it split up, but
Okay.
let me see.
Anyway, the total population is something like Belgium's, right?
Hmm.
And the world spins on this conflict because of its situation amid, as they say correctly, a sea of Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Arabs/Muslims. I mean, and yet they've made an exception to the point where everyone suspends or inverts their moral stance applied to every other situation universally until like yesterday, whenever it comes to this small group of 10 million people. There's 8 billion people on the planet. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of people with a lot of problems. 8 billion. There's too much time and effort is spent on this 10 million people. Like, walk away. I mean, walk away from it, in your mind, if not...
Yeah.
If you're not already involved in this is why I like the stance taken by Bobby Kennedy on this is, oh my God, there is no hope. This is where I was being facetious in earlier shows where I was like, yeah, vote Bobby. I mean, you look at that and go, we can't vote our way out of this. This is going where it's going. So he's the best of the left populist, right? And let's say Jordan Peterson is the most articulate of right populist. Well, they're both the same here.
Mm-hmm.
They're both saying on their X accounts right now that they're saying that these Muslim barbarians are rats and they should be basically wiped off the face of the earth. Like, if you follow or support or
Well, he didn't
put
say
your
that.
faith in
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to be fair, he didn't say that they were rats and they should be wiped out. He called the people who are supporting them anti-Semitic rats.
Okay. But then he also tweeted directly at Netanyahu and says, go get him.
He did,
which is a carte blanche to
Yeah.
level the place.
For sure, yeah.
And turn it into what Laura Loomis said, a glass parking lot. So,
Yeah.
it's in the air. There's definitely the main expression in those who are most skeptical of the state of affairs, i.e. the awake 10% of the population post-COVID. They're pissed on all levels and they want to save civilization.
Mm-hmm.
They all yesterday in unison said revenge, they call for annihilation.
On the basis of what?
Terrorism.
Just on the basis of terrorism.
They have it framed in their head that this is terror. What happened was a multi-site terror attack yesterday against 22 locations in southern Israel, totally unprovoked, barbaric, because they're Muslim or some variant of that. Okay. And many of them expressly, when they're criticizing shows of support in the Muslim ethnic populations, say in Western cities like London, New York, and France and elsewhere, they say, look, you see these leftists? They're the same problem that Israel has over there. What's going on, whether they realize it or not, is that they're leading everyone to a point where when the 10% gets power or gets close to power or gets another 30% on their side, they're going to wage genocide against those lefties/Muslims in their home country. Because, look, they're synonymous with the problem Israel faces over there. That's where this is all leading to.
Do you know
it's fucking horrible.
Do you know what's...
This is why you don't want to be involved in it.
Yeah. Do you know what's funny as well is like those people like would probably, and people like Peterson and those other people who are kind of clueless in this and have these hot takes of, wipe them out, kill them all, whatever. They probably see this kind of, they've been so programmed by, the terrorism, Muslim terrorism, Islamic terrorism over the past, how long is it now? Well, it's way before 9/11, but since 9/11, say, the population, like those people are susceptible to being programmed with that, who don't think. And like it's strange for me to hear myself define Jordan Peterson as someone who doesn't think, but he obviously there's a blind spot or a black spot in his thinking. They've been programmed so much with Islamic terrorism that and especially in recent years with ISIS and all that kind of stuff, they would conflate Palestinians attacking Israel with ISIS terrorists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird because it's not complicated in a certain sense. You just have to do a very cursory scratching of the surface and looking at the history and realize that ISIS, you can't conflate ISIS with Palestinian terrorism, or ISIS terrorism with Palestinian terrorism, because what ISIS were actually doing was is this, as we know, a kind of like mostly Western or funded by external sources, bunch of radical right-wing jihadis, Muslim fundamentalists, if you could even call them that,
who emerged from death squads in Sunni Shia divide in Iraq,
who emerged and joined, and what they wanted to do was establish a caliphate. That was their whole thing, right? We're going to establish a caliphate over these lands. And they never said much against Israel. It was all they were fighting against the Syrian government, fighting against other Muslim countries. Anyway, they wanted to take other people's land by force through violence and terrorism, based on a X 100 or 1,000-year-old claim that this land was theirs. That's
religious claim.
That's precisely what Israel did in Palestine. Whereas the Palestinians, in doing what they've done for a long time now, and most significantly yesterday, is to fight back against people who want to do that or who have done that. So ideologically, the Palestinian quote-unquote terrorists are actually anti-ISIS in their ideology. They're anti-Israel, but they would fundamentally be anti-ISIS, and they were as well. Most reasonable, true, actual Muslim Arabs in the Middle East were very much against ISIS. So I mean, you know what I mean? It's not hard to figure that out, but apparently some people can't do it because they just have this black and white thinking. They lump all Muslims into the terrorism category because that's what the American government and the Israeli government and the media have wanted you to do over the past 20 years since 9/11. And there you go, like a mindless sheep bleating out the same propaganda that has been fed to you for 20 years.
Yeah, it's crazy how dumb Western intellectuals have become in specific ways. So here's a counterexample, right? So right now there's knee-jerk framing of it as Jews with their Judeo-Christian brothers all over the West, right? Whatever.
Judeo-Christian, my ass.
Jews versus rabid Muslims. That's at the root of this. Oh my God, this eternal conflict. When there are people who have some kind of neutral position on it, they go, God, it's still going on, you know. Religion for you, Jews versus Muslims. Well, this is exposed as farce in light of what just took place last week in Azerbaijan, Armenia.
Mm-hmm.
The Muslim Azerbaijani military captured Armenian-held Nagorno-Karabakh with Israeli weapons.
Yeah.
And Iran sent humanitarian supplies and other assistance, apparently, to help the fleeing Armenian Christians.
Orthodox Christians. Yeah.
Christians.
So it's not about, the religion is a foil, and obviously it's
outside the West,
right
people are
wrong.
smart and they understand these things. Inside the West, it's like fucking cartoon world.
Yeah. Yeah. And Judeo-Christian just pisses me off, you know. Judaism and Christianity are two entirely different
That's
religious.
Yeah,
religious beliefs,
they've shown
religious
how this
ideologies.
emerged. They did word searches and stuff. This emerged in like
They
the
stuck it
60s.
together to try
Just
and-
in the 60s. There's no.
The Israelis did it to try and bind themselves to the Christian West, you know, so they
Well,
get
it's
them
been.
to do their bidding.
Has it not been bloody successful? Look at
Yeah.
what's just took place. The
Yeah.
mind merging, the enculturation of it, you know, and it's.
But
It's so crazy that look at all this effort to counter hate in every field, in every field where there's a war or conflict. Jesus, down to, he looked at me funny, I'm offended. Countering hate. There can be no hatred ever. It's a taboo. It's outlawed. You get punished for expressing anything that might be deemed as hate these days. But in unison, they can all call for revenge and collective punishment of Palestinians. And it's totally synced up, and that's not hate in them as
Yeah.
The one taboo.
Yeah, an example of the lack of thinking going on. I mean, you can have this report, which is just from, I don't know, it was AP or something yesterday, and people don't have the intellectual capacity to stop and wonder. It's like they probably think about that. They see Israel cuts electricity supply to Gaza, and they go, "Good, they deserve that." And they don't go any further. They don't wonder, how is it possible that Israel has such control over Gaza that it can shut off electricity supply to 2 million people? And what shutting off electricity supply to 2 million people does if you leave it off for weeks.
Yeah.
But there's no oppression of Palestinians, right? I mean, if you had your electricity supply regularly cut off by an oppressing power, you'd be fine with it, right? You'd never want to do anything about it, right? And if you're locked into the place where your electricity was cut off and you couldn't leave effectively unless it was say so, and if you tried to leave you might get shot or killed, you'd be fine with that, right? And if you'd lived like that and grown up like that since you were born, and it was a multi-generational thing, you'd be fine with it, right? You wouldn't want to attack anybody back. You wouldn't want to take any opportunity to strike back against the people who are tormenting you. You should just be thankful, no? How dare you? When you lash out against your tormentor, you're a terrorist, right?
Right. And then when you point that out to them, the absurdity of the position they're taking, you can see their minds start to rationalize next. It's like, okay, it's an impossible situation. So why, in the name of God, don't they just kind of basically politically accept what's going on? Become Israeli citizens, like the 20% of Arab Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. As much as they're abused and they're second class, they live and work in Israel. They have a life of some kind. Mm-hmm. Why don't they just accept that? Mm-hmm. They're not allowed to. That's the normalization process that the ultimate powers in Israel continually strive to avoid. That would be the way to get out here. Just kneel and accept and submit. And just drop all your religious / national aspirations. Just collapse already. You'll get to live some kind of a normal life. They're not allowed to. I bet many of them want to. Many of them do. They become informants and they effectively sell their soul to the enemy and they do whatever it takes to get a job over there and to get out and stuff. But no, Israel keeps that situation because they need the situation for the means to which they keep Israel united on this negative, not on a positive, we're all one. People project onto Israel that they're trying to create, it's the only democracy in the Middle East, and if the Arabs would just accept it, they could all live as one, and kumbaya.
Yeah.
No, that isn't the mindset we're talking about here.
People don't understand that Israel was set up as an outpost, primarily as an outpost of the US empire in the Middle East, to control the Middle East, and to keep the Middle East destabilized for American interests. And that's what it has, grown up to be, and it's become a kind of a monstrosity in that sense of those origins. It's become this distorted version of, it's not even really a state, it's an outpost. You can't really call it a state because that's not what it was designed as in the first place. Of course, it's got statehood, it's got the trappings of state, but it's the point of its reason for existing is not that. And if things were to normalize, if they were to allow normalization of the situation with Palestine, obviously it would have to be done on acceptable terms to Palestinians, and maybe there are acceptable terms, but if Israel were to do that, it would, and peace was to reign in the Middle East, and Israel was to make peace with Iran and stop saying Iran's trying to kill us and everybody else is trying to kill us, and never again, blah, blah. If it was to give all that up, Israel would become this relatively small little country in a much larger Middle East. And the dominant powers in that region would then be the bigger countries. And Israel would have to play not second fiddle, but fourth or fifth fiddle to the other bigger countries in the Middle East. And they don't want to do that because it's about power and dominance. And it's power and dominance for Israel. They've adopted that mantle themselves. But power and dominance by proxy, like I said from the beginning of Israel, power and dominance by proxy for America in the Middle East. So it's an experiment in that sense. Israel was and is an experiment. So you can't apply any of the normal rules that you would to, relatively peace-loving countries having neighbours and how they should act together. You can't apply that to Israel. That's not the point of Israel. That was never the point of Israel. Israel, it should, it would defy
Didn't some American strategists describe it as our unsinkable aircraft carrier?
Yeah.
Can't remember who.
Right. Yeah. So this kind of stuff is, again, it's very, very obvious. It doesn't take much to figure out. You look at the history, you look at the official statements and around the creation of Israel and why it is where it is and what it's meant to do. That gives you a totally different and much more objective and realistic and real and truthful perspective on what's going on today. And then you wouldn't be doing these hot takes, these moralistic hot takes, these manipulative and moralistic hot takes of, the bleeding heart stuff, terrorists, bad guys, good guys, goodies, baddies, somebody dies, I'm going to scream on Twitter about it and call for a nuclear strike on the evil terrorists. I mean, those people.
I nearly puked watching every new right conservative sound like a whinging liberal.
Yeah,
all day, and it's still going on today. Somebody I saw it earlier from Tom leaving a comment here. He said that the festival was called Peace Festival, for what it's worth. So.
Where a bunch of millennial hipsters get together and take some drugs and dance until they.
There was a big statue of Buddha or something.
Yeah.
As a central stage. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Let's see where it goes. You're thinking possibly prelude to a wider war. Obviously, that's something they would want to contain.
Well, what's going to happen? What's happening right now? I think what's going to happen right now is, the Israelis have a problem in a certain sense. The Palestinians. They're if it hasn't happened already, it's going to happen pretty soon. Where those few towns and villages that they kind of occupied yesterday will be taken back or being taken back by the Israeli military, but they will fairly soon.
Of course, yeah.
They'll have to fall back and be pushed back to the. They might leave some people there to try and make it more difficult for the Israelis to take it back, for the IDF to take it back. But then the next big thing that Netanyahu has almost been forced to do here is to wreak vengeance on Gaza. So no doubt the Palestinians have. Palestinian militants, as they're called, have a plan or have prepared for that, because Gaza is a nightmare for anybody actually trying to move in. The Israelis have always been seriously averse. They tried it a few times and it was always a bad idea when they tried to actually move directly into Gaza with troops and tanks or whatever, or APCs. Because it's just like you just get stuff dropped on you all over the place, you know what I mean? And it's urban guerrilla warfare, and it never goes well for the invading army. So what are they going to do? They're going to just bomb it from afar, maybe. They can keep bombing it, but they can only do that so much before. There's a line.
Families back home are crying for their hostage relatives.
Exactly, there's hostage. It's a very difficult situation. They're not going to. They did that wipe out. People are like, wipe out the whole Gaza Strip. That's not going to happen. Obviously, they can't wipe out the whole Gaza Strip. Well, they're going to kill 2 million people, 1 million children, sure. And obviously they wouldn't be able to do that because there'd be outrage, and that would force the hand of other Muslim countries in the Middle East and stuff. So, it's very difficult to know what they're going to do. It's like they can't do very much, and that's why the Palestinians basically did this. You know what I mean? Why they and now it may have been facilitated, like we were talking about, by some elements within the Israeli apparatus, political and military apparatus. It may have been facilitated to allow this to be worse than it would have been if they had actually mounted a proper defence and stopped it before it got very far. But that's why the Palestinians did it, because they know they've been through this so many times before. They know that the Israelis' hands are tied. You know what I mean?
The dynamics are well known to both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're gonna, it's like literally almost nothing to the Palestinians when they fire missiles and knock down apartment blocks. It's happened so many times before. They're like, big deal, whatever. Like, we didn't expect that. But come and get some. Come on in. No, you don't want to come in, do you? So what are you going to do? You're going to knock down a few buildings. You're going to kill a bunch of people, obviously. But you're probably not going to want to come in. And if you do try to come in, it'll be difficult for you. So then it's back to stalemate, right? But the problem is that there's a large number of Israelis who have been killed. So that's the wild card in this respect. It can't really follow. It can't follow on from previous Israeli operations of this kind in against Gaza in particular over the past 20 years. There've been well, it depends how you define it, but there've been loads of official ones and unofficial ones. Yeah. It can't really follow the same dynamic, because at the very least, there's going to be political. If it does go the same way, where, like I just said, they knock down a few buildings in Gaza, kill a bunch of people, innocent civilians, whatever, that's not going to be enough to avenge the number of Israelis that were killed, and to do something about the fact that the Palestinians were able to advance so far into Israel. So either, at the very least, there's going to be political repercussions in Israel and for Netanyahu that there wouldn't have been if it had followed a similar pattern as before. So, yeah.
Breaking news today in Egypt. 2 Israelis killed by an Egyptian police officer. Rumor is they were spies, but then officially they were tourists. So this policeman in Egypt kills 2 Israelis and 1 Egyptian at a tourist site in Alexandria. Mm-hmm. Scroll down and see if there's any hint as to why that was coming up. Open fire on Israeli tourists. That can't be the story. They don't just open fire. Egypt is so sensitive to that situation that something happened to force a shootout there. That's the extent of it so far. But already there's been 2 whiffs of this spreading. This one here, and then the north, as I mentioned earlier, Hezbollah opened fire or exchanged fire with the IDF on the Lebanon-Israel border.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we shall see.
You see, there's a few videos of them using drones as well. Drones to drop at least one tank.
That's new, huh?
Well, that's,
it's not new to us after the Ukraine war.
Well, exactly. But
that's the first time Hamas has done that.
Yeah. It's new in the sense of, it seems to be the era of drone warfare has begun in earnest. And it's very hard to deal with it. I don't know how many drones the Palestinians actually have. But that's really difficult for an Israeli, a planned Israeli incursion, on boots on the ground incursion into Gaza. Like, that's a nightmare, because they would come with APCs and tanks and stuff. And if they have enough of those drones, I mean, there's at least one video. There's a few maybe, but I've seen one of them just dropping a explosive from a drone on a Merkava, Israeli Merkava tank, and just destroys it. So
destroyed it.
Sets it on fire, basically. So that's yeah.
They've also captured some serious gear. This report here, DefenseSecurityAsia.com, reports Hamas captured, in addition to the one they destroyed, 14 Merkava tanks and 17 APCs. If they captured them, in the sense that they brought them back to Gaza intact, maybe also raiding like actual armories in that base they overran, then they have extra firepower they've never had before for such a situation where the IDF does roll into Gaza. Again, it's another first. Mm-hmm. Again, this elevates. If it is a LIHOP, let it happen on purpose. My God, someone's playing with fire.
Mhm. Yeah, well, there's a lot of people in the world today in positions of influence and power who
Or
appear
playing with
to
fire.
enjoy playing with fire and want to play with it some more. Yeah.
Okay. If you want to talk about any other news, I mean, it's been 2 weeks. Stuff has happened.
Can't
Both-
remember.
Both Canada and the US lost their speakers of the House in the space of a week through very different circumstances, but that is kind of a sign of the times.
Mm-hmm.
Canada, of course, we commented on it at the time, but that sure threw up a firestorm. What hadn't happened when we last talked about it was the climb down. We left it as, well, there you go. The West has gone Nazi and they've no problem with it. But they did climb down big time. And Trudeau gets to live another day by blaming it all on the Speaker of the House.
Mm-hmm.
This slick bastard.
People
He
believe
knew
him.
full well who was coming in. Everyone in Canada knew, or at least in UK diaspora circles in Canada, knew who this hunka guy was. They have memorials to actual SS Nazis all over Canada. Anyway, it's Canada's dirty secret that you're not supposed to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But by flashing it across the world, it forced a week-long attention on Nazigate, you know. And then last week, of course, in the U.S. Congress. Maybe is that what's happening in Congress? Could that be related to Israel flaring up, Israel-Gaza flaring up?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. They often do have tandem issues, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say. I've looked in the past at the timing of Israeli either self-inflicted or outright direct attacks against Palestinians, and there often is an angle in terms of an issue going on in the United States or vis-a-vis U.S. foreign policy. But I wouldn't hazard to guess what that is here, except that, of course, this House Speaker situation it's interesting. CNN says, why Clapper says Hamas attacks are an apt comparison to 9/11.
I just
There
want
you
to put
go.
this in perspective for viewers in the United States, viewers who are watching around the world, particularly in the United States. I've heard from Israelis saying that this is our 9/11. It's hard to make a comparison, but when you think about the scope of the attack, the surprise, the use of civilians, the killing of civilians, and now apparently, which is very different from 9/11, taking civilians hostage, obviously as to use as a bartering chip for whatever it is that they want. Do you think that
Whatever it
that
is
is
that they want.
sort of an important way to put
Whatever
this
it
in
is.
context and to view this?
Yes, unfortunately, I do. I couldn't help but think back on 9/11 and, of course, the extensive critiques and criticisms of the intelligence community, notably by the 9/11 Commission, which cited the intelligence community for, quote, its lack of imagination and a failure to connect the dots. And I couldn't help but reflect
remember hearing that.
on that phraseology in this case. I think perhaps the Israelis had sort of a stereotypical image of Hamas's military capabilities and did not expect them to be able to mount such a sophisticated multi-pronged attack and on such a surprise basis. So I think, unfortunately, it is an apt comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Sure. Whatever. I'm going to start using... can I have personal 9/11s? You know, like if I fall down the stairs or something like that, I'll say it was an intelligence failure. I failed to connect the dots or connect like my leg with the stairs, and I fell down, and it was devastating, and it was my personal 9/11. Everything I don't like is my personal 9/11. Yeah.
Whenever God does me wrong,
Yeah.
it's my 9/11.
Yes. Anyway, yeah. Well, is there anything else?
Of course there is, but
Of course there is, but nothing so pressing.
that's the current event anyway. That's the
Yeah.
current thing.
The
It's always
current thing-
important to, I think we've done our bit to pull people back. I mean, I see a lot of people putting the fucking Israeli flag in their bio. These are the people who had Ukrainian flag in their bar at the beginning, since became skeptics and have since railing against the fact that they were duped into that. And
Right.
the Israeli flag is in the bio.
But they like being duped, so they want more
They-
duping. I'm not feeling like I need a dupe. I need to be duped. I don't feel good. Yeah. Anyway,
Do you have a joke for us this week? Oh, that is the joke.
How
Your
do-
personal non-level.
yeah, this is my personal level. That was a joke. No, how does an appropriate joke, a relevant joke? How does Moses make tea?
Go on.
He brews. Anyway,
He brews.
Hebrews, Neil. Come on. Wasn't that hard. Anyway, yes, on that sorry note, on that horrible joke, we're going to leave it there for this week. Folks, thanks for listening, watching. Hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks for commenting. We'll be back next week with another one. So until then, have a good one. See ya.
Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
Can't stop the signal now.